Benjamin Carter stood in front of the towering glass building that bore his name, his reflection staring back at him through the sleek, polished surface. Carter Enterprises was more than just a company. It was his company. He had built it from the ground up, turning a small investment firm into one of the most successful corporations in the industry. But lately something had changed. The reports landing on his desk had begun to sound troubling. Employee morale was low, productivity was dropping, and the whispers, rumors of a toxic work culture, of executives who looked down on lower-level employees, of an environment where kindness had been replaced with cold efficiency. Ben didn't like rumors. He believed in facts, and if he wanted the truth, there was only one way to get it. That's why tonight, instead of stepping through those doors as the CEO in a tailored suit, he would walk in as someone no one would look twice at. Inside the dimly lit parking garage, he changed into the uniform of the night shift janitorial crew. A pair of dark work pants, an old t-shirt, and a company-issued blue maintenance jacket. The clothes felt strange on him, foreign, as if he had stepped into someone else's life. He tucked his watch into his pocket and pulled a cap low over his face. Without the polished shoes, without the confident stride of a man who owned the place, he became invisible. And that's exactly what he needed. Taking a deep breath, Ben entered the building through the service entrance, where the employees most people never thought about came and went. The air was different here, quieter, heavier. The receptionist at the security desk barely glanced at him, pushing a clipboard forward with a bored expression. "Name?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment before responding. Ben Carter." She didn't even look up as she scribbled on the log. "First shift." "Yeah." She handed him a keycard. "Locker rooms down the hall. Someone will tell you what to do." That was it. No welcome, no introduction, just a transaction. Ben nodded, gripping the keycard as he walked toward the janitorial locker room. He had built Carter Enterprises from nothing, yet tonight he was nothing in the eyes of his own employees. And that told him everything he needed to know. This was going to be an eye-opening experience. The first thing Ben noticed wasn't the work itself. It was how little anyone noticed him. He had expected some level of anonymity, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer invisibility that came with wearing a janitor's uniform. As he pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway of his own corporate offices, employees brushed past him without so much as a glance. Conversations about high-stakes deals and upcoming meetings flowed around him, but no one spoke to him. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. He wasn't Ben Carter, the CEO, anymore. He was just the guy cleaning up after everyone. He entered the main lobby, where two junior executives leaned against the reception desk, laughing about their latest client call. As he bent down to wipe a spill near their feet, one of them stepped back without looking, nearly knocking him over. "Watch it, man," the executive muttered, not even bothering to check if he was okay. Ben exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the cart. So, this is how they treat the people who keep this place running? A few minutes later, he entered the break room, hoping to blend into the background and listen in. Employees sat at tables, chatting over coffee, scrolling on their phones. None of them acknowledged him as he wiped down the counters and emptied the trash. "Hey, custodian guy." Ben looked up, hopeful that someone had finally noticed him. "Coffee machines out of filters. Think you can handle that?" The woman didn't even look up from her phone, as she waved a dismissive hand in his direction. Ben clenched his jaw but nodded. "Sure thing." As he moved toward the supply cabinet, a voice called out from behind him. A different voice, a warmer one. "You must be new." Ben turned. Standing in the doorway was an older janitor, dressed in the same navy blue uniform but carrying himself with an air of quiet confidence. His hair was speckled with gray, his features lined with age, but his eyes were sharp. "Name's Walter," the man said, extending a hand. "Been at this job longer than most of these kids have had careers." Ben shook his hand, noting the firm grip. "Ben," he replied. Walter nodded. "Welcome to the most invisible job in the building." Ben let out a dry chuckle. "I noticed." Walter smirked. "Yeah, you will. But let me tell you something, you learn a lot about people when they think you're not worth their time." Ben studied the older man, realizing there was something different about him, something unshakable. And for the first time that day, Ben wasn't just observing. He was curious. Ben found himself watching Walter more than he worked. The older janitor moved through the office with purpose, cleaning spills, emptying trash cans, and straightening chairs with a quiet efficiency. But what struck Ben wasn't how Walter worked. It was why. He didn't just do his job, he cared. When an employee dropped a stack of papers rushing to a meeting, Walter didn't hesitate. He knelt, gathering the pages with care, handing them over with a small smile. The woman barely looked at him, mumbling a quick thanks before hurrying off. Walter just nodded, unfazed, and went back to work. A little later, a frustrated IT worker sat at his desk, rubbing his temples as he stared at a malfunctioning computer screen. Walter, instead of just passing by, paused. "Rough day?" he asked casually. The IT guy exhaled sharply. "You could say that. Deadlines, system crashes, and now my boss is breathing down my neck." Walter nodded knowingly, grabbing a nearby trash can to empty it. "Sounds like a mess." He chuckled. "But let me tell you something. A problem always looks bigger when you're standing too close to it. Step back, take a deep breath, and you might just see the answer you weren't looking for." The employee blinked, then let out a quiet laugh. "You sound like my grandfather." Walter grinned. He must have been a smart man. Ben leaned against his mop handle, taking it all in. Walter wasn't just a janitor. He was a presence. The kind of man who didn't just clean up after people but lifted them up, too. Yet no one seemed to notice. No one thanked him when he picked up someone's forgotten coffee cup. No one said a word when he moved a chair back into place after someone left it crooked. And still, he kept going. That night, as they worked together in the quiet halls after hours, Ben finally spoke up. "You ever get tired of it?" he asked, wiping down a window. Walter looked over. "Of what?" "Being invisible." Walter smiled, shaking his head. "Son, I'm only invisible to people who don't know how to see." Ben stared at him, that simple sentence hitting harder than he expected. Who exactly was Walter? And how did a man like him, so wise, so grounded, end up pushing a mop instead of leading a boardroom? Ben needed to find out, and something told him the answer was going to change everything. The building was nearly silent. The hum of computers in sleep mode the only noise filling the empty office. Ben and Walter moved through the dimly lit hallways, their footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. Their shifts had fallen into an easy rhythm over the past few days. Ben mopping floors, Walter emptying trash bins, the two exchanging quiet conversation in between tasks. But tonight felt different. Ben could sense it in the way Walter moved, slower, more thoughtful, as if his mind was somewhere else. Curious, Ben broke the silence. "You ever think about doing something else?" Walter chuckled, tossing a tied-up trash bag into the bin. "You mean besides pushing this cart around?" Ben smirked. "Yeah." Walter leaned against the counter, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I've done a lot of things in my time," he said. "Some good, some bad. But if there's one thing life's taught me, it's that your job doesn't define who you are. Your character does." Ben nodded slowly. "That's a rare way to look at things." Walter exhaled, his gaze drifting toward the office windows, where the city lights flickered in the distance. "I wasn't always in a janitor's uniform, you know," he said, his voice quieter now. Ben's grip on the mop tightened. He hadn't expected this. Walter glanced at him, a knowing smirk on his face. "That surprise you?" Ben shrugged. "Just curious." Walter chuckled. "I used to sit in one of those offices just like the rest of them. Used to wear the fancy suits, have the big title. Worked harder than anyone else in the room. Thought I had it all figured out." Ben frowned. "So what happened?" Walter tilted his head, as if deciding how much to say. "Life happened," he said simply. "Some people climb too high too fast. They forget what's holding them up. And when they fall," he let out a breath. "Well, not everyone gets back up the same way." Ben studied him closely. Walter wasn't just talking about some abstract idea. He was speaking from experience. And suddenly, Ben needed to know more. Walter stretched his arms, shaking off whatever memories had gripped him. "Come on," he said, pushing his cart forward. "Still got floors to mop." Ben hesitated for a moment before following. He had a feeling Walter's story wasn't just interesting, it was important, and somehow it was going to change everything. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that Walter was more than he appeared to be. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the wisdom in his words, the quiet confidence that didn't match his uniform. Walter wasn't just a janitor. He had been something else, something more, and Ben needed to know the truth. That night, after his shift, he sat in his home office, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating the room. He typed in Walter's full name, followed by a few keywords. Former businessman, executive. He didn't expect much, but what he found, it left him speechless. A string of old articles surfaced, business magazines, financial news reports, even interviews. Each one painted a picture of a man who had once been at the top of the corporate world. Walter J. Lawson, former CEO of Lawson Industries, a billion-dollar firm specializing in real estate and private investments. A self-made millionaire, a respected leader, and at one point one of the most influential figures in business. Ben scrolled through the pages, his heart pounding as he read. And then came the downfall. A lawsuit, a massive financial scandal, investors pulling out, lawsuits piling up, assets frozen. In just a matter of months, Walter had lost everything. His company, his wealth, his reputation. And then he disappeared. There were no follow-up stories, no recent interviews. It was as if he had vanished. But now, Ben knew exactly where he had gone. He was mopping floors in his office building. Ben sat back in his chair, running a hand down his face. How does a man go from boardrooms to janitor closets? More importantly, why? Was it shame? Punishment? A conscious choice? Ben exhaled sharply. Walter had been through hell, and yet, he never spoke with bitterness. He never complained. Instead, he worked humbly, quietly, almost as if he had found something in this simple life that money couldn't give him. But why keep it a secret? Ben stared at the screen, the old photo of Walter in a suit and tie staring back at him, looking like a completely different man. Tomorrow night, Ben would go back to work. But this time, he wouldn't just be watching Walter. He was going to get answers. Ben walked into work that night with a different mindset. He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was here to understand. Walter was more than a janitor. He was once a man at the top, a man who had built an empire and lost it all. And yet, here he was, quietly sweeping floors, offering wisdom to strangers, living a life that most people overlooked. Ben needed to know why. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic squeak of the mop filling the empty hallway. Finally, Ben spoke, keeping his tone casual. You ever think about the past? Walter chuckled. Only every day, kid. Ben leaned against the mop handle. I looked you up. Walter's hands stilled. Ben continued, his voice careful but firm. I know who you are, or who you used to be. For a long moment, Walter didn't say anything. Then, with a slow exhale, he set his mop aside and leaned against the supply cart. Figured you might, he said quietly. You don't seem like the type to let things go. Ben folded his arms. So, why are you here? Walter ran a hand over his face, as if trying to smooth out the weight of his memories. Then he looked at Ben, really looked at him. You ever lose everything? Walter asked. Ben hesitated, then shook his head. Walter nodded as if he expected that answer. I did, and not just the money, the trust, the people, the life I built. Ben stayed silent, letting him continue. I ran a company, just like you, Walter admitted. I had everything they tell you matters, the power, the money, the influence. I worked harder than anyone else, trusted the wrong people, and when things started to fall apart, those same people tore me to pieces. Ben could hear the pain beneath his steady voice. There was a scandal, a setup. I wasn't innocent, but I wasn't the villain they made me out to be, either. Walter let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. The media loves a good fall from grace. One moment you're on magazine covers, the next. Ben shifted. He had seen it happen before, CEOs, executives, billionaires who lost everything in an instant. But none of them ended up here. So why this? Ben gestured to the mop. Why not start over? Walter looked around the empty office, a small smile forming. Because when you strip everything away, the titles, the money, the expectations, what's left? He paused, then tapped his chest. The kind of man you really are. Ben swallowed. He wasn't expecting that answer. Walter picked up his mop again, nodding toward Ben's. Come on, kid. Floors don't clean themselves. Ben gripped the handle, his mind racing. Walter had lost everything, but somehow he had found something more. And for the first time, Ben wasn't sure who was really learning from who. Ben couldn't shake it, struggles with what he has learned. Walter Hottie's more wisdom in a single sentence, experienced and wiser than half many of his executive team combined. The man had been at the company's top, lost it all, and yet here he was, humble, content, and seemingly at peace with his place in the world. But Ben wasn't. It didn't sit right. Walter didn't belong cleaning executives. Yet, He is sweeping floors. He belonged in boardrooms, leading, making decisions that actually mattered. And yet, Walter had chosen this life. Why? Ben needed to know, but instead of asking outright, he did what any good CEO would do when assessing a potential leader running meetings. Rather than confronting him immediately, Ben devises a plan to test Walter's character even further. He put him to the test. That night, as they worked, Ben decided to push a little. "You ever miss it?" he asked casually, scrubbing a spot on the floor near Walter. Walter chuckled. "Miss what?" Ben looked up, meeting his gaze. "The power, the influence, having people listen to you." Walter smirked. "I'm talking to you, aren't I?" Ben rolled his eyes. "You know what I mean." Walter sighed, leaning on his mop. "Sure, some days I think about it, but the world I lived in before is not the same world I walk through now, and I've learned that chasing what you lost can make you blind to what you have." Ben let those words sink in. He wasn't buying it, not completely. Walter was clearly sharp, strategic, and capable, more so than half the people with offices upstairs. And if he really believed his own words, then Ben needed to see just how deep that belief went. The test. The next night, Ben arranged for a little situation. During their shift, he left a thick folder on a desk in one of the executive offices, an old report filled with confidential company data. He placed it in just the right spot, noticeable but not obvious, a temptation carefully laid out. If Walter really didn't care about power, about status, about proving himself, then he'd leave it alone. But if even a small part of him wanted a way back into that world, then Ben would know. As the night went on, he kept glancing at Walter, waiting, wondering, would he take the bait? Or had Walter truly left that world behind? Ben was about to find out, and the answer might change everything. The night had felt longer than usual. After confirming everything he has learned, Ben had been watching, waiting, testing, and now he had removes his answer, disguise, and reveals his true identity to Walter, never so much as glanced at the folder. He passed by that executive desk countless times, wiping it down, organizing stray papers, but never touching the report. Ben had watched for any sign, hesitation, curiosity, even a flicker of temptation. But there was nothing. Instead of just offering money or a reward, Ben proposes something shocking. He wants Walter hadn't just walked away from back in the corporate world. He had truly let it go. And that made what Ben was about to do even more important. As they finished up their shift, Ben leaned against the supply cart, exhaling slowly. "Walter," he said, his voice steady, "there's something I need to tell you." Walter glanced up from wringing out his mop, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds serious." Ben let, offering him a small smirk across his face. "It is." Then, without hesitation, he removed his cap. Walter frowned as Ben straightened his posture, no longer slouching under the weight of a janitor's uniform. In one smooth motion, he unzipped the blue work jacket and let it hang loosely around his shoulders, revealing a crisp dress shirt underneath. Walter's expression didn't change at first. He just studied Ben carefully. And then, like a switch flipping, his eyes sharpened with realization. Ben extended a hand. "Benjamin Carter, CEO of leadership role in Carter Enterprises." Walter didn't move, didn't blink. For the first time since they met, he looked truly caught off guard. After a long pause, Walter let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be damned." Ben laughed. "Not what you expected, huh?" Walter smirked. "Not even close." Ben's tone turned serious. "I've been working here to see what this company has become, to see if the culture I built still exists. And honestly," he exhaled, "it's worse than I thought." Walter folded his arms, watching him carefully. "And what does that have to do with me?" Ben met his gaze. "Because you're exactly the kind of leader this place needs." Walter's brow furrowed slightly. Ben continued, "I'm not offering you money. I'm not here to write you a check for some feel-good redemption story." His voice was firm. "I'm offering you a position, a leadership role at Carter Enterprises." Walter let out a breath, shaking his head. "Ben, I appreciate it, but I'm not asking for an answer right now," Ben interrupted. "Just think about it." Walter studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right, kid, I'll think about it." But Ben knew, no matter what Walter said, this decision would change everything. Walter stood there, his hands still gripping the handle of the mop, his mind racing. The quiet hum of the building surrounded them, but for a few seconds, it felt like everything had stopped. He had heard Ben's offer, understood the words, but still couldn't process what was being asked of him. A leadership role at Carter Enterprises? The offer was insane. He had walked away from that world for a reason. After everything that had happened, the betrayals, the financial ruin, the way he had been discarded like a tool that no longer served a purpose, he had no desire to go back. Yet here was Ben Carter standing in front of him, offering him a second chance at the life he had once had. A life that seemed so far away, buried beneath years of mistakes and regrets. Walter didn't know what to say. He had rebuilt himself after his fall from grace, but in doing so, he had found a different kind of peace. A quieter, simpler existence that no longer depended on the chaos of boardrooms or the empty promises of wealth. He had made his peace with the fact that the world had moved on without him, and so had he. But this offer? This was a door he hadn't even considered opening. For a long moment, Walter simply stood there, the mop in his hand, a symbol of the life he had built since stepping away from the corporate world. He glanced at Ben, who was waiting patiently, as if he already knew the answer would come. "I don't know," Walter said finally, his voice low. "I never wanted to go back to that world." Ben's expression softened, understanding in his eyes. "I get it," he said, "but this isn't about the world you walked away from. It's about what you can bring to this company now. The wisdom, the experience, the heart that so many of these people have forgotten about." Walter looked down at the mop again, as if the answer was written in the floor beneath him. The sound of the mop dragging across the tile echoed in the silence. "I spent years running from it," Walter said quietly, almost to himself. "And now you want me to jump back in?" Ben didn't rush him. He didn't pressure him. He simply said, "The choice is yours, Walter, but whatever you decide, you've already changed this place." Walter felt the weight of his words. Ben was right. In his quiet way, he had already changed something in Carter Enterprises. He had shown them what real leadership looked like. The question now was, could he bring himself to step into that role again? Or would he stay where he was, content with his quiet life, his new sense of self? Finally, Walter looked up, meeting Ben's eyes. "You know," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, "I thought I was done with it all, but maybe this is a second chance after all." Ben's face lit up with surprise. "So you'll do it?" Walter nodded slowly. "I will, but don't expect me to play by the same rules as everyone else. I'm not going to be your typical corporate leader." Ben smiled, his eyes gleaming. "Wouldn't want you to be." As the weight of Walter's decision settled in, the room seemed to exhale in relief. Walter's choice had stunned everyone, but in the end, it felt right. He wasn't just returning to his old life. He was creating a new one that would bring the heart and wisdom he had gained into a place that desperately needed both. The days following Walter's decision to return to the corporate world were a whirlwind. Ben could hardly believe how quickly things had changed, but there was no denying it. The transformation was palpable. Walter's first day in his new role was a quiet one. He didn't walk in with fanfare or high expectations. Instead, he took his place among the team with the same humility and resolve that had defined him during his time as a janitor. But what happened next was far from subtle. The employees who had once ignored Walter, those who had dismissed him as nothing more than a fixture in the background, now looked at him with respect. They began to see him as someone who understood the business at a level they couldn't. He wasn't just an outsider who had wandered in. He was someone who had seen the heights of success and the depths of failure. He had weathered a storm that most of them could never imagine, and now he was bringing that hard-earned knowledge back to Carter Enterprises. As Walter settled into his leadership role, Ben watched as the company shifted around him. Meetings became less about strategy and more about people, about how decisions affected the employees who made the company run. Walter didn't just focus on bottom lines. He focused on the hearts of the people who were the real engine of the business. One day, Ben walked into a meeting where Walter was presenting a new initiative, a way to involve employees in company decisions more directly, making them feel valued and empowered. Ben stood at the back of the room, watching as Walter spoke with calm authority, but more importantly, with genuine care for everyone in the room. Walter wasn't just talking about improving numbers, he was talking about improving the way the company operated on a human level. And it worked. Morale improved, productivity spiked, and most importantly, people began to trust each other again. It was a slow process, but the ripple effect was undeniable. Ben reflected on everything that had happened in the past few weeks, the undercover days, the conversations with Walter, the shock of discovering his past, and he realized something profound. Leadership wasn't about titles or positions. It was about being able to stand in someone else's shoes and truly see them for who they are, not for what their job title says. Walter had taught him more about leadership in a few short weeks than Ben had learned in years of climbing corporate ladders and running meetings. Walter's legacy wasn't defined by his past success or failure. It was defined by his ability to see the value in people, to make them feel important, and to lead with a strength that came from experience, not power. As Ben walked through the halls of Carter Enterprises, he couldn't help but smile. Walter had restored something far greater than the company's reputation. He had restored its soul, and in doing so had taught everyone the true meaning of leadership. That's the story, friends. One man's journey from the bottom to the top, not through titles or money, but through humility, wisdom, and the ability to see the potential in others. Walter's decision didn't just change his life. It transformed an entire company and reminded us all what real leadership looks like. If you've learned something from Walter's story about what truly matters in leadership, or if you've ever experienced an unexpected second chance, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories of inspiration, transformation, and life-changing moments, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next powerful story that we'll be sharing soon. Thank you for watching, and remember, true leadership comes from the heart, not the title. See you next time.